Before we begin with the keynote address from Professor Hyun Taek Kim, I'd like to say a few introductory words about our speaker. He is one of the leading Russian literature specialists in Korea, and he has served as director of Institute of Russian Studies at Korea University of Foreign Studies since 2014. Professor Kim, we will now start the session again.
Very much for your introduction. I'm a student of Russian literature, so in fact, I did not want to give this speech, but I was forced to do. Because literature has to participate in this process as well. The topic of my today's talk sounds like this: Russia-Asia relationship from a Korean perspective. Our institute, which is now called Institute of Russian Studies, IRS, at this university was founded in 1972. At that time, it was called as the Institute of Soviet Union and East European Affairs or Problems. The title was already the strange one. Not the studies, but problems. In those days, the international community was characterized with Cold War ideology, which made it virtually impossible any direct communication or exchange between the Republic of Korea and Communist bloc. Against such a backdrop, our IRS served as the first research center beginning to collect and examine periodicals and other publications from the Soviet Union, North Korea, and other socialist countries. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 led our institute to approach Russia and conduct its researches in terms of the Korea-Russia relationship, which means, in retrospect, that IRS has hardly enlarged its research scope to the relationship between Russia and other Asian countries. Recently, however, Russia has actively taken the so-called pivot to Asia policy while coping with the rapidly changing international relations and economic crisis in the aftermath of Ukrainian conflict. And these circumstances demand us to approach the Russia-Asia relations multilaterally and in more fuller scales. Russia's pivot to Asia, also called the New Eastern Policy, is under lively discussion at this very moment. But its discussions focus mostly from the viewpoints of geopolitics and geoeconomics, and it focuses on the two or multi-party relationship between Russia and any given country among Asian regions, including Russia-China relationship. It is why we need to approach the relations between Russia and Asia from various angles and in depth, within the context of history, culture, and civilization, as well as in political and economic terms. It is also the main reason our IRS, inviting representative experts in various academic fields from all over the world, holds an international conference, probably for the first time in Korea, to discuss the relationship between Russia and Asian regions, including the Korea-Russia one, from the perspective of the humanities and other interrelated disciplines. As widely known, Russia has been seeking to build up its cooperation with Asian countries these 10 years. In particular, Russian President Vladimir Putin began his third term in presidency with installing the Ministry for the Development of Far East to develop Russian Far East and Siberia and to reinforce the cooperation with East Asian countries. It is one of the Putin's attempts to invigorate and diversify Russian economy. In addition, as the Western countries of the EU and US imposed economic sanctions against Russia in the aftermath of the Ukraine conflict and the Russian annexation of Crimean Peninsula, Russia has spurred to reinforce its cooperation with East Asian countries of Korea, China, and Japan, among others. Historically, the interest Russia has shown in East Asian regions is not something that started just yesterday. Imperial Russia at the end of the 19th century sought to advance to these regions. In the same vein, the Gorbachev government made efforts to improve its relationship and to promote its economic cooperation with Asian countries in the late Soviet Union. This way, East Asian countries have, as ever, held an imperative position for Russia when Russia seeks to protect its national interest and ultimately to develop itself at various aspects such as national security, geopolitics, resource exports, and regional development. Likewise, in his speech at the APEC summit meeting in Beijing, China, in November 2014, President Putin reasserted the pivot to Asia policy when he clearly stated that Russia would take positive steps to develop its economic cooperation with China, among other Asia-Pacific countries. In June 2015, the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said at a meeting with Russian businessmen that Russia had to pay more attention to improving its relationship with Asian partners insofar as the Western countries no longer welcome Russia. Can it be possible to say that Russia's pivot to Asia policy means a permanent estrangement of Russia from its close Western countries? How authentic is that policy, and how multiple are its implications? And where does the policy set its ultimate goal? And does it exert practical influence on the East Asian regions? At the same time, what do East Asian countries, including Korea, think of Russia? And how do they respond to this Russia's pivot to Asia? To settle these questions in interdisciplinary spirit, our international conference under the title of Rethinking Russia's Pivot to Asia, Context, Perceptions, and Prospects seeks to approach the interrelationships between Russia and East Asian countries and their mutual understanding multilaterally from different angles of Russia, Asia, and Western countries. Through these discussions, our conference will examine the nature and motives of Russia's new orientation and then assess its possibilities and limitations as well. Now, let me look on what significance Russia has had on Korean Peninsula. Geographically, first of all, Russia is one of the closest countries to Korea. It is a neighboring country on the other side of the Tunan River from the Korean Peninsula. The ferry from Donghae Port, the South Korean East Coast city, the ferry from this city will take you just in a night to Vladivostok, the windows toward Asia, even if you are not allowed to get to Russia at present by land because of the division of our country. And it takes 2 hours or so to reach Vladivostok from Seoul by air. That is to say, Russia is a close-by country to Korea. Now we South Koreans are free to enter Russia anytime without suffering any difficult immigration inspection after the Korea-Russia visa waiver agreement for short stays which was signed in 2014. History also shows that Korea and Russia have shared close relations with each other. Both countries came to be close neighbors, taking the opportunity of signing the Korea-Russia Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce and Navigation already in 1884. Korea had since begun to accept Russian cultural products quite wholeheartedly. This period witnessed the first Western-style buildings as well as such monuments as Dongninmun. It's one of the most famous monuments in our country, Independence Gate, built as outcomes of the Russian cultural influence in Seoul, in Incheon, and some other Korean cities in the south. However, after the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and the Japanese annexation of Korea in 1910, the direct exchanges between Russia and Korea were cut off. In the period of the Japanese colonial occupation, Russia was not recognized officially in the Korean peninsula. In those days, nonetheless, Russia continued to exert influence over the areas of culture and art in Korea. To take an example, out of the Western literatures accepted in Korea at that time, Korean readers embraced most enthusiastically and were under the strongest influence of Russian literature, which they could get access to by way of Japan. Indeed, Russian literature exerted an enormous influence on Korea in the period of the Japanese colonial occupation. The educational and enlightening aspects, rather than artistic merits of Russian literature, loomed larger in Korea because of our political situation at that time. It makes sense when you consider those contexts in which Koreans deployed the movements of national liberation and enlightenment. It was no accident that into the early 20th century Korea, who introduced actively after the lapse of half a century time, Russian literary works reflecting the rapid political and social changes of Russian society, the Russians experienced the 20th century. In particular, the Narod, going to the people movement, which the Russian intellectuals conducted for the enlightenment of rural communities and society 50 years earlier, reached and developed in Korea with the exactly same title in the early 1930s. In this way, Russian literature had a decisive influence on the formation and development of Korea's early modern literature in the 1920s and 30s, colonial space. This tradition of influence can easily be traced back among not a few Korean writers declaring that they had been fully baptized in Russian literature, among other foreign ones. Besides, in the space of liberated Korea, as well as in the period of Japanese colonial occupation, Russia exerted not so little influence culturally on the political and cultural movements of Korean art through its leftist ideas of revolution. However, Russia was a country far away from Korea at the same time. Russia, hidden behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, was an object of fear and terror for South Koreans for some time. Russia's Far East and Siberia, geographically close by to us, were the strictly closed space of labor concentration camps and military-industrial cities. One image of which Russia reminded us was, above all, the Kremlin in Moscow. The Soviet Union, the country from which communism has originated, was in itself a taboo, which was hard of mentioning openly in South Korea because of its ideological conflicts between North and South. Under the situation of Cold War ideology, with official channels completely shut off from Russia, however, Koreans showed special affection toward Russian literature and arts. This is how, during the Cold War, South Korea encountered an ironic situation. Russia was a subject of dreadful fear in conflicts of political systems, on the one hand, and on the other hand, Russia was an object of interest and longing in the area of literature and art. This kind of response in Korea can serve as a good example for the cultural interest and exchanges between two countries without official diplomatic relations. South Korea's so-called Northern policy and the diplomatic relations established between Korea and Soviet Union in the late 1980s and early 1990s were epoch-making events in the Korea-Russia relationship. Our former President Roh Tae-woo, in his inauguration speech in February 1988, declared his strong will to push for the Northern diplomacy, to improve relations with the communist countries as an ultimate road to improving inter-Korean relations and then to the national unification. The Roh Tae-woo government, in fact, established the first department, the Special Department for Northern Diplomacy, under our Foreign Ministry in 1990. The historic South Korea and Soviet Union summit meeting was held between Roh and Gorbachev in San Francisco in June 1990. Soon after, on the 30th of September, the foreign ministers of our both countries met at the UN headquarters in New York to sign the agreement to establish diplomatic relations at ambassadorial level. This is how the diplomatic relations were established between Korea and Soviet Union. In this way, the first time in history, Korea began to secure its independent perspective to regard the continent. Now, Korea came to show the most flexible and innovative new thinking in history when it promoted political and economic exchange with the communist bloc countries, including Russia and China. Thus, the exchange and cooperation with Russia that Korea achieved through new thinking 26 years ago led to contracting the Korea-Russia visa waiver agreement for first phase 2 years ago. This kind of agreement, which our neighboring countries, China and Japan, has not yet reached, means the Korea-Russia relations have been so much stable on the basis of mutual confidence. However, the rapidly changing international situations after Ukrainian conflicts in March 2014 confirmed that the relations between countries, including Korea-Russia relations, cannot solely depend on mutual intentions. That is to say, the Korea-Russia relations instability cannot be free from the rapidly changing international politics. It seems to me that Russia's pivot to Asia now serves as an opportunity for us to make a breakthrough for the Korea-Russia relations in stasis. And at present, on the other hand, what kind of approach has Russia taken towards Asia, or rather East Asian countries, including Korea? President Putin said in a newspaper article in February 2012 that Russia should find a possible way to take advantage of the Asia-Pacific countries' economic growth in order to develop the economy of Russia's Far East and Siberia. Putin put a special emphasis on the importance of its cooperation with major Asia-Pacific countries such as China, Japan, and Korea in the course of developing Far East and Siberia. In the same vein, Russia's concept of foreign policy, officialized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2013, shows that Russia has taken much deeper interest in these Asia-Pacific countries. It is very interesting here that this document specifies the major Asia-Pacific countries one by one, which was not the case in the previous documents. It proves that Russia has changed its attitude toward these Asia-Pacific countries so much in a few years. Now Russia came to recognize these Asia-Pacific regions have risen to the largest economic bloc in the global village, commanding 57% of the world's GDP and 48% of the world trade volume. This heightened interest in Asia has led Russia to give shape to its pivot to Asia policy by recognizing this region as the space which would have a decisive influence on the national interest and future of Russia. Putin, in his third term in presidency, has been unprecedentedly active in developing Far East and Siberia by installing the Ministry for the Development of Far East, as I mentioned before, and then adopting the national program for the social economic development of Far East and Trans-Baikal regions. In this regard, it is worthwhile to note that the Russian government established Far East Federal University on Russky Island when holding the APEC summit meeting in Vladivostok in September 2012. This university, built in Russky Island of Vladivostok, the window towards Asia, reminds me of the academic and research center St. Petersburg University, constructed in Vasilyevsky Ostrov of St. Petersburg, the window toward west. Which means Russia is making efforts not only to strengthen the hard power of economic cooperation with Asian countries, but also to consolidate the soft power of academic, cultural, and artistic exchanges. It must be a great change, considering that Vladivostok served chiefly as a home port for Pacific Fleet in the past Soviet era. In the same context, Vladivostok worked as a field of active cultural exchanges as well as economic cooperation between Russia and Asian countries while holding the Eastern Economic Forum in September this year. Recently, Russia has not only put its blood into economic and technological development by constructing Vostochny Cosmodrome in the Far Eastern region, but it is also struggling to promote culture and art in this area. Vladivostok built the Maritime Province branch of Mariinsky Theater and then held a Far East Festival inviting prominent artists from Russia and from other Asian countries. It will soon open, the Vladivostok will soon open a new branch of Tretyakovskaya Galleria as well. All this means Russia sets a high value on the soft power together with the hard power in consolidating its relationship with Asia. In this respect, it is time for academics to examine in earnest Russia's positive pivot to Asia. Now, I would like to emphasize one fact here. Any academic investigation of the Russia-Asia relations can be made at the national level. But it should be conducted in a humanistic spirit in which one can contemplate oneself in a new perspective of his or her relation to others. Much research has been done on the Europe-Russia relations, with not a few developments and changes in their relations ensued. On the other hand, there has been comparatively little research as to the Russia-Asia relations. Now it is needed to shed a new light on the history of cultural exchanges between Russia and three East Asian countries of China, Japan, and Korea. In this regard, the Mutual Recognition Survey between South Korea and Russia, conducted jointly by our institute and SIOM, the All Russian Public Opinion Research Center, is full of suggestions for the future development of both countries' relations. Likewise, recent book published by our institute, From Sabatin to Pushkin, 150 Years of Russian Culture in Korea, bears quite much significance. This kind of research work will help pave the way to the coexistence and co-prosperity of East Asia and Russia. And I believe that this international conference will be part of that research work too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kim. He has published recently two very important books. One of them is From Shabatin to Pushkin, which he just mentioned, and the other one is the Ice Link on the Red Square. That book is about the key character of the new post-Soviet culture. So, as a Russian literature specialist, he contributed greatly to extend our knowledge on, the relationship between Russia and Korea. Thank you again for your very insightful speech. Yeah, thank you. Okay, now then we finished the opening session, and then